What would you do if the man you were about to marry humiliated you at the altar, right before your godmother, a decorated army colonel, stepped in and changed everything? Have you ever watched a moment shift so fast, so sharp, it left the air still and your heart catching up? That was the kind of day it was. A Saturday in early May. The sun was warm but not too hot, a breeze brushing against the backs of chairs and lifting the corners of linen napkins. It was the kind of spring morning people in Chesapeake Beach, Maryland, pray for during wedding season. And for a while, it felt like everything was exactly how it was supposed to be. The ceremony was in the backyard of a waterfront home, not grand, but elegant. Rows of vintage wooden chairs lined up perfectly, a harpist strumming softly in the corner. Pear trees in full bloom framed the aisle. Under a floral arch that probably cost more than a month's rent in D.C., Celeste Morgan stood near the altar. She didn't just look beautiful, she looked composed, like she wasn't trying to impress anyone, just being herself. Her posture alone made people stop mid-sentence. She wore a fitted gown, simple in design, with soft beading at the shoulders. Her hair was pulled into a neat twist, exposing a tiny ink tattoo just behind her left ear. It was barely visible, unless you knew it was there. Her bridesmaids, 6 of them, stood behind her in warm terracotta dresses. The tone was earthy, timeless. Nothing about it screamed trendy. It felt like her, real, grounded, honest. In the front row, Ruth Morgan, Celeste's mother, sat in a navy blue dress, clutching a handkerchief and already teary-eyed. Celeste's cousins from Ohio were streaming the ceremony for the aunties back home. Her old college roommate, Jenna Fields, leaned toward the person next to her and whispered, "She looks like a queen." Everyone was there, except for one person. Colonel Evelyn Hart, Celeste's godmother, the woman who had been like a second mother to her, was missing. No one had gotten a clear answer why. She was stationed in Germany, and there had been talk of last-minute deployment orders, maybe travel complications, maybe something else. Either way, she wasn't there. And though Celeste hadn't said much about it, you could see it in her eyes. She missed her. Still, she stood tall. She didn't fidget, didn't glance at the guests or the aisle. She kept her gaze ahead, holding on to her bouquet like it was the only anchor she needed. Then came the groom. Garrett Whitmore, tall, polished, every bit the man from a powerful Maryland family with old money and deep ties in politics and real estate. His suit was cut sharp, his shoes clean enough to reflect light. The Whitmores didn't smile much, but they didn't scowl either. They sipped cucumber water, offered polite nods, and looked at the diversity of the crowd like they'd stumbled into a gallery opening. Garrett had always known how to work a room, charisma that fit neatly into corporate mixers and networking events. He was charming, in small doses. When he and Celeste first met at a policy roundtable in D.C., he had stayed behind to help clean up, but spent most of the time making jokes and trying to get her number. She said no, then maybe, then yes. He wore her down. He often said he liked that she challenged him, that she had fire with brains. And for a while, it seemed like he meant it. Now, standing just a few feet away from her, Garrett looked every bit the loving fiancé. The harpist paused. The officiant nodded. Guests shifted in their chairs, phones raised to capture the moment. And Celeste took one steady breath. This was it. The beginning of everything. At least that's what she thought. The moment had arrived. The harpist's hands fell silent. The breeze seemed to hush. All eyes were on Garrett Whitmore as he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a microphone. That wasn't part of the plan. The officiant gave him a curious glance. Celeste shifted slightly, her face still holding that calm, bridal glow, but her eyes flickered with uncertainty. Garrett turned to the guests and smiled. "Before we do the vows," he said, "I'd like to say a few words." A few guests clapped politely. Others looked at each other with raised eyebrows. This wasn't rehearsed. Ruth Morgan, Celeste's mother, leaned forward, her hands tightening in her lap. Jenna Fields, the best friend, looked confused but hopeful. Maybe it would be romantic. Celeste's smile faltered, not completely gone, but now it held a question. Garrett adjusted the mic, cleared his throat, and grinned. "I didn't plan this part," he began. "But I figured, hey, it's a wedding. Why not speak from the heart?" People chuckled softly. The kind of chuckle that says, "We're with you, for now." Garrett nodded, warming up. "Marrying Celeste is the bravest thing I've ever done." Another chuckle, but this one felt different. Something about the way he said bravest. Celeste blinked, just once. Something in her posture stiffened. "I mean, let's be honest," Garrett continued, gripping the mic tighter. "Celeste is intense." More chuckles, this time mostly from his side of the aisle. His best man smirked. Someone near the back let out a low laugh. Celeste didn't move. Her bouquet lowered half an inch. "She's the kind of woman who will debate you over a dinner bill," Garrett went on. "Correct your grammar mid-sentence, and God help you if you try to explain something she already knows." A few people laughed. Awkward, unsure laughs. Others exchanged glances. He wasn't giving a toast, he was giving a roast. At his own wedding. "She once told me I misused the word, however, in the middle of a conversation," he said, chuckling. "A conversation, y'all." That got a few laughs. But others were now clearly uncomfortable. Ruth's smile was gone, her lips pursed. Jenna whispered something under her breath. A cousin stopped recording. Garrett wasn't done. "And don't get me wrong," he said, adjusting his collar. "I admire her strength, her fire. But let's just say, introducing her to my parents came with some, resistance." Someone near the front snorted. Garrett's mother crossed her legs and looked away. His father looked like he wanted to disappear into the chair. Celeste didn't flinch, but her eyes were glassy now. "She doesn't exactly play the traditional role," Garrett kept going. "She's not going to sit quietly and nod. She doesn't bake cookies. She doesn't laugh at your dad's jokes." He laughed again. Loudly, like he was waiting for everyone else to join in. They didn't. A weak clap came from someone. Someone else cleared their throat. "I'm just saying," Garrett shrugged. "She's different." Strong-willed, unfiltered. Then he turned to Celeste and gave her a crooked smile. "But hey, I'm still here, right?" Celeste didn't smile back. She scanned the crowd instead. Her friends, her family, her whole world, watching her get chipped away piece by piece by the man she was about to marry. Garrett turned to her again, microphone still in hand. "Babe," he said. "You okay?" She didn't answer. Not yet, because something was happening. A small stir from the back of the garden, a shift in the energy. Heads turned. Someone had just walked in, slow, steady, silent. At first, some thought Garrett was just nervous. Public speaking isn't easy, especially on a day like this. And weddings come with pressure. But as he kept going, his smile a little too proud, his jokes a little too sharp, it became clear. This wasn't nerves. This was something else. "I mean, she challenged me from the beginning," Garrett said, still clutching the mic. "That's what drew me in. She made me work for it." Said no, then maybe, then yes. Some guests laughed, but others were shifting now, glancing sideways, unsure where this was going. "I always said she was fire with brains," he added. "But let me tell you, marrying a woman like Celeste, someone who doesn't back down, who calls you out when you're wrong, it's not for the faint of heart." Celeste's bouquet dipped slightly, not because her hands were weak, because her heart was heavy. Garrett continued, "She's the kind of woman who corrects your pronunciation when you're just trying to tell a joke. The kind who reads books about books. Who sends you articles mid-argument." Laughter from his groomsmen again. "I mean, when I brought her home the first time, my mom didn't say much, but afterwards she asked me, 'Are you sure she likes us?'" His voice was light, but the room was growing heavier by the second. I told her, that's just Celeste. She's got walls. She's intense. But deep down, she's warm. There it was again. That word. Intense. Said like it was a flaw. Said like it was something to be tolerated, not cherished. Celeste stood still, but every woman in the room knew what she was feeling. They had heard this tone before, had been described this way before. She doesn't do fake smiles, doesn't soften her opinions to fit the room, doesn't pretend to be impressed just to make a man feel taller. Garrett chuckled. And that's admirable. It is. He paused, scanning the audience as if looking for approval. What he found instead were furrowed brows and folded arms. But let's be honest, he said, living with someone who's always right. That's not easy. Now the laughter came only from one side. The other was quiet. Still. Processing. Celeste's face didn't change much, but her eyes told the truth. The hurt was beginning to land. The realization was beginning to form. This wasn't a man celebrating her. This was a man performing a monologue meant to elevate himself by reducing her. She once told me I used the phrase per se wrong, Garrett continued. I didn't even know people could use that wrong. Another strained laugh. Even his best man was looking down now. I admire her, he said again. Truly. She's not like anyone I've ever dated. She's not sweet in the conventional sense. She's not soft-spoken. She's not manageable. Manageable. That word rang like a bell no one wanted to hear. Celeste's fingers tightened around the stems of her bouquet. She wasn't blinking anymore, just listening, just absorbing. And somewhere inside, something was shifting. But here I am, Garrett said, gesturing toward her. Still standing. Still choosing her. That's got to count for something, right? He looked to the crowd for validation. It didn't come. Instead, the silence grew heavier, thicker, and then it changed. From the back of the garden, a murmur began. Heads turned. Whispers sparked. And Celeste saw her first. Colonel Evelyn Hart. She moved with quiet purpose, her presence slicing through the tension like a blade. No jewelry, no makeup, just the dark green dress uniform of a United States Army officer, rows of pins and ribbons neatly aligned across her chest. Not a hair out of place, not a step out of sync. She didn't rush. She didn't frown, she just walked. Garrett hadn't noticed yet. He was still caught in the echo chamber of his own words. I thought honesty was supposed to be the foundation of marriage, he said, trying to laugh. I'm just being real. That's when people began standing. Not many, just a few, enough to signal that something or someone was coming. Garrett turned mid-joke and saw her. He blinked, laughed nervously. Colonel Hart? Wow, I didn't know you were flying in. Big surprise. No reply. Evelyn didn't stop, didn't blink. She walked until she was 10 feet from the altar. And then she stood, arms behind her back, boots planted on the stone path. Her gaze never wavered. Not once. The garden fell completely silent. No one had to ask who she was. They knew this was the godmother, the woman who helped raise Celeste. The woman who'd seen war and walked through fire. The woman who didn't show up often, but always showed up when it mattered. And right now, she was exactly where she needed to be. Garrett froze. The microphone hung loosely in his hand now, no longer a weapon, no longer a joke. He looked directly at Colonel Evelyn Hart, and for the first time that day, he had no words. She stood tall, shoulders squared, boots silent against the stone path. Not a hint of hesitation in her face, just stillness, the kind of stillness that makes people sit straighter without knowing why. Celeste saw her, and something inside her softened, not from relief, but from recognition, from a kind of strength she remembered deep in her bones. Evelyn Hart, had always been that way. Quiet power, steady force. The guests whispered among themselves. Is that her godmother? She came from Germany. She's really military. They didn't have to ask. They could see it. Every row of pins on her chest told a story. Every stripe on her sleeve carried weight. This woman didn't enter a room. She arrived. Garrett cleared his throat and tried to smile. Look, I was just being honest. You know, people say honesty matters in a marriage, right? Still no response from Evelyn. She just stared at him, unblinking, measured, controlled. And then finally she spoke. You always were a talker, she said. Her voice was calm, but it cut through the air like glass through silk. You fill silence with your voice, hoping no one notices the content. The room held its breath. There wasn't anger in her tone. There wasn't performance. Just clarity. I heard you loud and clear, Evelyn said, and so did everyone else. She turned slightly toward the guests, scanning the crowd with military precision. I don't care if you flew in from DC or Dayton, if you wear $1,000 loafers or Sunday heels. If you sat here and watched a man tear down a woman he claims to love on her wedding day, you are not a guest. She paused. Let it land. You're a witness. Celeste's hands trembled slightly, but not from fear. Not anymore. She wasn't alone. Evelyn turned back to Garrett and stepped forward, slow and deliberate. Let me explain something to you, son, she said. Garrett flinched at the word son, because when a colonel calls you that, she's not being sweet, she's being deliberate. Celeste Morgan is not your punchline. She is not your different. She's not your edgy story to tell your colleagues over whiskey and fake laughs. She is not your redemption arc. Garrett opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Evelyn took one more step forward. This woman was raised by fighters. By women who worked 2 jobs and still braided their daughters' hair on Saturday mornings. By women who buried their husbands and still made it to the polls the next day. By women who never needed to raise their voices to be heard. The crowd shifted, some nodding, some clapping quietly. But the clapping grew, and it wasn't polite applause. It was honest. Raw, a recognition of truth. You think you're brave because you grabbed a microphone without a script? Evelyn asked. That's not brave. She turned slightly, glancing at Celeste. Brave is standing here in a world that keeps asking you to shrink and choosing to rise anyway. Celeste looked down, blinking back tears. Jenna Fields whispered amen under her breath. Garrett looked around, clearly shaken. He tried to reset, to recover. Look, he said. That was just me being real, joking. I get nervous. I didn't mean anything by it. Evelyn raised an eyebrow, the kind of brow only a seasoned colonel can raise. If disrespect is your reflex under pressure, she said flatly, I suggest you stay single. The words hung there, suspended in the air. Behind her back, Celeste's fingers unclenched. Her body eased, not in defeat, but in readiness. Everything Garrett had said, every joke, every veiled critique she had once brushed off, they weren't isolated. They were patterns. And now she saw them all. Evelyn didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Because presence like hers doesn't shout. It commands. Celeste took a small step forward. Her lips parted, but she didn't speak yet. Her jaw tightened. She was choosing her words carefully, not out of fear, but out of power. The crowd watched in silence. Even the harpist had quietly put her instrument down. Evelyn glanced at Celeste, gave a subtle, near invisible nod. Not for drama, not for effect. Just connection. She had said what needed to be said. And now she was done. The room no longer belonged to Garrett. It didn't even belong to the guests. It belonged to Celeste. Celeste stood still for a moment, her eyes locked on the man she was about to marry. Garrett was shifting now. His smile was gone, replaced by something between embarrassment and confusion. He looked out at the guests as if hoping someone, anyone, would come to his defense, but no one moved, not even his own parents. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that doesn't ask for attention but demands it, the kind that says something is coming. And then it did. Celeste stepped forward, not dramatically, not with a trembling lower lip or shaking hands. She moved like a woman who had just remembered who she was. She didn't ask for the microphone. She didn't need it. When she spoke, her voice was steady, low, but it reached every corner of that garden. 3 years, she said. 3 years together. And you still don't know the difference between teasing me and tearing me down. Garrett's mouth opened, searching for something to say. Babe, don't, she cut in. Don't babe me. Not after that. A few gasps rippled through the crowd. Her mother, Ruth Morgan, placed a hand over her mouth. Jenna Fields stared, lips parted, whispering, "Oh my God." Celeste turned to the guests, not to apologize, not to explain, but to be seen. This was supposed to be about us. About love, about two people beginning something honest, but he used this moment, my moment, to make me a punchline. A character in a story that flatters him. Garrett looked to his side of the aisle. His best man looked down at his shoes. His mother folded her arms. His father leaned back in his chair like he wanted to disappear. Celeste kept going. I fought for this relationship. I made space for his flaws, his learning curves, his excuses. I coached him through difficult conversations with my family. I explained why his jokes weren't funny. I defended him when my friends asked questions. Her voice broke slightly, not from weakness but from memory. I carried this relationship. And the one time I was supposed to be lifted, celebrated, he made me small. Garrett took a step forward, desperate now. It wasn't like that. I didn't mean... Nerves don't create new truths, Celeste said. They reveal the ones you've been hiding. And that was it. That was the line. A few guests nodded. One even whispered, "That's right." Celeste turned slightly, eyes sweeping the garden. Her gaze was clear, firm. She wasn't asking for sympathy. She wasn't making a scene. She was claiming her truth. I've spent too much time trying to convince you and myself that you could grow into the kind of man I deserve, she said. But now, I see, you were never trying to grow. You were just hoping I'd shrink. And just like that, the air shifted again. This wasn't a speech. It wasn't a breakup. It was a release. Celeste looked down at her left hand. The ring. Elegant. Simple. She had picked it out herself. Without a word, she slid it off. She didn't throw it, didn't make a show of it. She simply held it up for a second, just long enough for the room to understand, and placed it gently back in Garrett's palm. His fingers closed around it instinctively, but his face was lost. The microphone still hung at his side. But now, he had nothing left to say. Celeste turned back toward her bridesmaids. Jenna stepped forward, gently taking the bouquet from her hands. It was barely a gesture, but it meant everything. Then someone clapped, just one. Soft, slow, unsure. Then another, then a few more, until the entire garden echoed with a steady, unforced applause. Not loud, but honest. Garrett stepped back, his face burning. Still holding the ring, still holding the mic, but no longer holding her. Celeste turned to Evelyn Hart, her godmother, her anchor, and said quietly, "Thank you for coming. I needed you more than I realized." Evelyn smiled just slightly. "You didn't need me to speak," she said. "You just needed to remember your own voice." And she had. For the first time in years, maybe ever, Celeste felt light. Not happy. Not relieved. Free. The applause faded, not because people stopped caring, but because no one quite knew what to do next. This was still, technically, a wedding. The officiant stood off to the side, frozen with his little black book still open, unsure whether to say something or simply disappear. The harpist had long set her instrument down, sitting quietly with her hands folded in her lap. No music could match this moment. Celeste turned toward Garrett one last time. He was still holding the ring, still stunned, still not understanding that something irreversible had happened. He tried again. "Celeste, wait, please, I didn't mean—" She held up her hand. "Not in anger, just finality. There's nothing left to fix," she said. "I'm not angry. I'm awake." And that was worse for him, because anger can be reasoned with. But clarity? That's permanent. She took a deep breath. Her chest rose slowly, then fell. Then she stepped down from the altar. The grass was soft under her shoes, her gown brushed against her legs. Somewhere in the distance, a bird chirped, as if nature hadn't gotten the memo that this wasn't that kind of celebration anymore. People parted as she walked, like a tide moving for something bigger than itself. Some guests stood. Some stayed seated. Some looked away, unable to hold her gaze. Others watched her with admiration or envy, because they had never done what she just did, and maybe they never would. Near the back, her mother, Ruth Morgan, rose to her feet. She didn't speak. She didn't ask questions. She simply opened her arms, and Celeste walked straight into them. For a moment, she rested her head on her mother's shoulder, just like she used to after long days at school. There was no ceremony now. No procession, no flowers being thrown, just truth. Raw and unpolished. "You good, baby?" Ruth whispered softly. Celeste nodded. "I am now." Ruth kissed her on the cheek and gave her a gentle squeeze. "Then walk proud," she said. "Let him watch." And Celeste did. She walked past friends and co-workers, past the man who had once promised her forever but couldn't give her the most basic form of respect, past photographers who had stopped taking pictures, past Garrett's college roommate who muttered something to his girlfriend like he was still trying to figure out what had just happened. He'd tell this story later, of course, but he'd leave out the part where he said nothing, where he sat in silence while his friend publicly belittled a woman in front of 100 people. Near the last row of chairs, Colonel Evelyn Hart was waiting. She hadn't moved. She didn't need to. Celeste approached her, neither one speaking right away. Then Celeste looked her godmother up and down and said softly, "You look good in that uniform." Evelyn smirked. "Hot as hell, though." Celeste laughed, really laughed, for the first time all day. "I didn't think you'd come," she said. "I wasn't sure I'd make it," Evelyn admitted, "but something told me I needed to be here." "You don't miss your child's wedding. Not if you can help it." Celeste's eyes watered again, but she blinked fast, trying to hold it in. "It means everything," she said. Evelyn tilted her head. "Means more that you stood up there and chose yourself." They stood there for a moment, shoulder to shoulder, not as a bride and a colonel, not even as goddaughter and godmother, just as two women who knew how hard it is to walk away from something that once felt like home. Behind them, the crowd began to stir. People gathered their things. Some offered nods of support. Others whispered into their phones, texting family members about what had just unfolded. Garrett still hadn't moved. He remained near the altar, holding the ring like it might still mean something if he just held it tightly enough. But it didn't. He wasn't a villain in some made-for-TV drama. He was worse, a man who never realized how small his words were, until they echoed through something sacred. Celeste didn't look back. She and Evelyn walked side by side, equal pace, equal strength, toward the edge of the garden, past the empty chairs, past the wilting centerpieces, past the floral arch that now felt more like a monument than a memory. Near the catering tent, A young waiter, maybe 19, whispered under his breath, "Respect." Celeste heard it. She gave him a small nod. By the time they reached the gravel path that led to the front gate, her bridesmaids had begun packing up what was left of a day that would never go as planned. Some hung back, unsure whether to speak or give her space. Celeste didn't mind. She understood. This wasn't just a wedding that ended early. It was something deeper. A shift. A woman choosing peace over performance. A woman walking out of the wreckage, not broken, but awake. The sun had dipped lower now, casting a golden haze over the garden, but the warmth in the air had long since faded. What had started as a celebration now lingered like a memory, trying to decide if it was good or bad. Inside the main house, the staff moved quietly, packing away champagne flutes and untouched hors d'oeuvres. A woman from the venue leaned in to whisper to a colleague, "Do we still serve dinner?" Her co-worker just shrugged. No one had the answer, because no one expected this. Out on the front porch, Celeste Morgan sat alone on a wooden bench. Her heels were off, tucked beside her. Her wedding dress, once perfectly arranged, was now slightly bunched around her ankles. Her veil, so carefully pinned that morning, lay in her lap like an artifact from a life she almost chose. She looked out toward the gravel driveway where cars were slowly pulling away. Some guests left quickly, avoiding eye contact. Others lingered, unsure if they were allowed to say goodbye. A few brave ones offered a quiet nod in her direction, as if to say, "You did what we couldn't." But Celeste wasn't looking for applause. She was looking for quiet. And finally, she had it. Leaning against the porch column a few feet away was Colonel Evelyn Hart, still in full uniform. She hadn't changed, hadn't softened, and somehow she looked like she belonged even more now than she did in the ceremony. "Do you regret it?" Evelyn asked, not looking at her. Celeste didn't answer immediately. She stared ahead, letting the silence speak first. Then softly she replied, "Not a bit." Evelyn nodded. "Good." And that was it. No lecture, no speech, just two women, sitting with the truth. The only sounds were the wind brushing through trees, the gravel crunching beneath tires, and the distant hum of life going on outside this moment, beyond this house. Celeste exhaled. It was the kind of breath you don't realize you've been holding for years. "You know," she said after a long pause, "for the longest time, I thought if I didn't make this relationship work, I'd be proving all the wrong people right." Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "What people?" Celeste leaned forward, elbows on her knees. "The ones who said I was too picky, too independent. Too much. The ones who said I'd never find someone if I didn't make myself a little easier to love." Evelyn didn't answer right away. She let Celeste continue. "So I compromised," Celeste said. "Little things, at first." She started ticking them off quietly. Stopped correcting him when he misquoted statistics. Let him tell jokes that made me flinch. Smiled through dinners where he talked over me. Said nothing when he made comments about how intense I can be. Her voice didn't crack. It didn't need to. The words were heavy enough on their own. "I didn't even notice how much I was shrinking," she said. "Not until I didn't recognize myself anymore." Evelyn pushed off the column and sat beside her. Their shoulders almost touched. Neither one said a word for a while. Then Evelyn said, "Love doesn't require shrinking, and it sure as hell doesn't require erasing." Celeste let the words sink in. She'd known it, somewhere deep down. But hearing it from someone who had worn steel in war and still spoke with softness, that made it real. "I just kept thinking, if I walk away from this, people will talk," Celeste admitted. "They will," Evelyn said. And some will say I overreacted." "They will." Celeste turned toward her godmother. "So what do I do with that?" Evelyn smirked. "You survive it." She paused, then added, "And eventually, you stop surviving and start living." Celeste smiled for the first time in a while. Not out of joy exactly, but from the relief of being understood. Just then, Jenna Fields, her college roommate and maid of honor, stepped outside holding a tote bag and 2 bottles of water.
"I brought your things," she said softly. "Also, pretty sure Garrett's mom tried to swing at the wedding planner." Celeste blinked. "Seriously?" "Missed," Jenna said.
Wedding planner ducked. Very impressive. Evelyn let out a rare laugh, the kind that rumbled from her chest like it had been waiting for the right moment to escape. Jenna handed Celeste a water bottle.
"You okay?" she asked.
Celeste nodded.
"Yeah, I actually am."
Jenna leaned in for a hug.
"I'm proud of you. Not because of how it ended, but because you chose yourself in front of everyone."
Celeste hugged her back.
"Thanks for staying."
"Always," Jenna said, and disappeared back inside. When the door closed, Evelyn tapped Celeste lightly on the shoulder. "You know what you're doing tomorrow?" Celeste shook her head. "No idea." "Good," Evelyn said.
"That means you've got options." Celeste let that sit with her. She looked down at her bare hands. No ring.
No bouquet. Just skin, warm, real, and steady. She wasn't starting over. She was starting true. The house was quiet. No music, no clinking of glasses. No murmurs from the crowd or sound of champagne being poured. Just the low hum of the ceiling fan, the occasional creak of settling wood, and the distant rumble of a car disappearing down the gravel path. It was late. The kind of late where even the emotions start to dim, like lights fading at the end of a long show. Celeste Morgan sat cross-legged on her couch, still in her wedding dress. Her veil lay draped over one armrest, and her shoes were kicked off somewhere by the front door. She didn't look polished anymore. Her makeup had smudged, her hair had loosened, but her eyes, they were the clearest they'd been in years. Across the hall, the guest room door was slightly ajar. Colonel Evelyn Hart had gone to bed hours earlier. Her suitcase was still in the hallway, military tags dangling off the side. She hadn't unpacked. She never did unless she had to stay. Celeste had offered to wash her uniform. Evelyn just waved it off with a smile.
"It's seen worse," she'd said.
Now, alone in the living room, Celeste looked down at her hands. No ring. No bouquet. Just her skin, bare. Honest. Her phone buzzed on the cushion beside her. Another text, maybe from a friend. Maybe from a guest who had already heard through whispers and social media that something had gone down at the Whitmore Morgan wedding. She didn't open it. Instead, she tapped the voice recorder app. Not for social media, not for any blog or podcast, just for her. She took a breath and hit record. "You don't really notice when it's happening," she began, her voice quiet, nearly a whisper. "When you start adjusting who you are so someone else can stay comfortable." She stared ahead, eyes fixed on nothing in particular. "It's small at first, changing how you speak, laughing at jokes that don't feel funny. Choosing silence over correction because you don't want to sound like you're always on edge." A pause. And then one day, you're standing at your own wedding, listening to someone tell 100 people that your confidence is a burden, that your strength is inconvenient, that your clarity is a punchline. She exhaled slowly, letting the silence settle before continuing. "I almost let it slide. I really did. I almost smiled through it, because I didn't want to make a scene." Her voice stayed level. Not angry, not shaky, just steady. But scenes are made whether you speak or not. The only difference is who's directing them. That line sat in the air like a held breath. She reached for the bottle of water on the table, took a slow sip, then leaned back against the couch cushion. "I don't regret walking away," she said. "I regret waiting so long to remember who I was." She looked down at her lap, picking absent-mindedly at a loose thread in her gown. "I hope someday someone hears this and decides to stop second-guessing themselves. I hope they leave the room that makes them small,
even if it's a room full of applause. A faint smile touched her lips. Not from pride, from peace. She reached out and tapped stop. The recording saved. She didn't re-listen, didn't name the file. Just left it there, like a sealed letter to her future self. Proof that she had chosen clarity over comfort. From the guest room, she heard Evelyn shift slightly in bed. A quiet creak of the frame, then stillness. Celeste stood, peeled off the dress slowly, and changed into a soft, oversized t-shirt. One of those old, stretched-out ones that you only wear when the world feels too loud. She walked barefoot to the kitchen, opened the fridge, grabbed a piece of leftover cake, untouched from earlier, and ate it cold, standing up. It tasted better than she expected. Later, as she crawled into bed, her limbs heavy with exhaustion, she didn't replay the day like a trauma reel. She didn't wonder what people were saying. She didn't ask, what if? Instead, she whispered to herself, I chose me, and that was enough. The next morning, the sun filtered through her blinds, casting soft stripes across the hardwood floor. The world hadn't ended. The sky hadn't fallen, but something had changed. She felt it in her chest. That lightness, that stillness. In her inbox were dozens of messages. Some from friends, some from strangers who had already heard, some offering apologies for laughing at Garrett's speech, realizing too late what they'd participated in. She replied to none of them, not yet. Instead, she opened a blank email draft. Subject line, The Wedding. She wrote, To those who came in love and support, thank you. The wedding is no longer happening. But the future is still very much alive, and so am I. She clicked send. That was it. No dramatic explanations, no emotional outpouring, just truth. Simple, clear, unapologetic. By Monday morning, the whispers had turned into voices. Not loud, not angry. Just everywhere, in offices, in brunch spots. In texts that began with, Did you hear what happened at that wedding? Some said she overreacted. Others called her brave. A few wondered if it was all staged, some kind of feminist stunt. A couple of people even tried to defend Garrett, calling him misunderstood, saying he was just being real. But Celeste Morgan wasn't listening to any of it. She knew how fast people form opinions, especially when they're not the ones who had to stand in front of a crowd with a heart in pieces and a smile frozen in place. And she also knew. No amount of whispering could touch her anymore. Because whispers have power only when you're still questioning your choice. Celeste wasn't. That Monday, she woke up with the same clarity she had gone to sleep with. She made coffee in silence, watered the plant she always forgot about, put on a sweatshirt that still smelled like spring detergent. The sun poured in through the kitchen window, and for once, it didn't feel like it was shining on a mess. It felt like it was shining on what was left, and that was more than enough. At 9:14 a.m., she opened her inbox. 37 new emails, some were from guests, some from co-workers. A couple from old classmates she hadn't heard from in years. She didn't open any of them right away. She clicked on the one she'd sent the night before. The wedding is no longer happening, but the future is still very much alive, and so am I. She read it again, slowly. Not to check for typos, but to remind herself that the most powerful things she'd ever written weren't long. They were clear. In the days that followed, there were calls she didn't return, comments she didn't reply to, photos she quietly untagged herself from. Some people reached out with heartfelt messages, others with unsolicited advice. One text read, I mean, it was awkward, sure, but couldn't you have waited until after the ceremony? She didn't respond. Because what she had done wasn't about timing, it was about truth. Another message simply said, You walked out in front of everyone. That took guts. That one made her smile, not because she needed praise, but because someone got it.
On Wednesday, she got a letter in the mail, handwritten, from one of Garrett's aunts. Inside was a folded card with a pressed flower taped to the corner. The message read, "You reminded me of a younger version of myself, one who didn't walk away. I hope you never forget what you did." Celeste held the card for a long time, not because it was from someone important, but because it reminded her this wasn't just about her. It never had been. There were women, too many, who had sat through speeches just like Garrett's, and smiled through them, and clapped politely, and swallowed their pain like pills they were told to take without question. Celeste had walked away, and now others were watching. Not to judge, to remember. Later that afternoon, she stepped outside barefoot, the grass cool against her skin. A neighbor she barely knew waved from across the street. He hesitated, then called out, "Saw what happened. You good?" Celeste didn't yell back. Didn't give a long speech. She just nodded once and said, "I am." And for the first time in her life, she meant it without any explanation. That evening, she sat at her desk, pulled out a blank sheet of paper, and wrote across the top, "What I know now." She listed quietly, "Love doesn't humiliate, strength isn't a flaw, confidence doesn't require apology. Walking away is not failure, it's flight. Respect is the bare minimum, not a reward." She paused after the last one, then added, "I am not hard to love. I was just with someone who didn't know how." She folded the paper once, twice, and slid it into a journal. Not for the world, not for a post, just for her. Because some truths don't need sharing to stay powerful. They just need to be lived. She didn't replay the wedding in her head anymore. Didn't edit what she should have said. Didn't mourn the bouquet she never threw. Instead, she thought of how it felt to step down from the altar, feet sinking slightly into the soft grass, dress brushing against her calves, 100 eyes on her. And for the first time, not caring, because it wasn't a walk of shame, it was a return to herself. 1 week later, the wedding that never happened was still being talked about. A few friends had moved on. Some still whispered about it like it was gossip. Others had turned it into something bigger, a conversation starter, a question asked at parties. Would you have walked away like she did? But for Celeste Morgan, it was no longer a headline. It was a closed chapter. Not forgotten, just folded. She didn't care if people thought she was brave or dramatic or complicated. She didn't need their labels. Because she knew the truth. She wasn't the woman who left. She was the woman who stayed too long. And then finally chose herself. The night of what would have been her honeymoon departure, she sat on her bedroom floor in sweatpants, a bowl of cereal in her lap, and a candle flickering softly on the nightstand. The wedding dress had been dry cleaned and stored away, not out of regret, just respect. It was a piece of who she was then, not something to burn, something to remember. Her phone buzzed beside her. This time, she picked it up. It was from a woman she barely knew, someone she had worked with on a short-term project years ago. I watched the clip. I've played it back 3 times. I've been engaged for 4 months and I haven't felt seen in weeks. Thank you for showing me what choosing yourself looks like. Celeste stared at the message for a long moment, then typed just 2 words. You're allowed. She didn't need to say more. The rest, that woman would figure out on her own, just like she had. Later that night, Celeste reopened her voice recorder app, the one she'd used to capture her own reckoning. She hit play. She listened to her voice, steady, calm, clear, as it walked through what it meant to shrink, to silence yourself, to be made small in a room full of people who are smiling. And then she whispered something she hadn't said out loud before. I'm not broken. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't loud, but it felt like a declaration. Because for years she had quietly believed that needing too much meant being too much. that wanting respect and equality and partnership, real partnership, made her difficult. It didn't. It made her honest. On Friday, she did something she hadn't done in months. She took herself out to lunch. Just her. No phone on the table. No pretending to be busy. She ordered exactly what she wanted, and when the waiter smiled and said, "Just one today?" she smiled back and said, "Just me." And for the first time, those words didn't sting. They felt like freedom. That afternoon, she walked into a local print shop.
She handed over a USB drive with one file on it. "I just need one copy," she said. The clerk printed it on thick ivory paper and slipped it into a folder. Celeste took it home, taped it to the inside of her closet door, and read it aloud to herself. "You are not too much. You are not difficult. You are not hard to love. You are worthy of respect, even when you're loud, especially when you're loud." It wasn't a manifesto. It wasn't a vow. It was a reminder, a grounding, a truth. That weekend, she took a walk near the water. The breeze was cool and salty, brushing against her cheeks. Couples passed by, hand in hand. Parents pushed strollers. A dog barked in the distance. She walked slower than usual. Not because she was tired, but because she didn't feel rushed anymore. And somewhere between the docks and the rocks, she thought about the version of herself who would have been on a honeymoon right now. The one who would have smiled for the camera, said "We're doing great" at brunch, laughed at jokes that didn't land, and cried silently in hotel bathrooms. Celeste didn't hate that version. She just didn't owe her anything anymore. As the sun dipped low behind the horizon, she sat down on a bench and opened a blank note on her phone. She typed, "If you're reading this and you've ever stayed quiet so someone else could feel bigger, if you've ever laughed through discomfort or apologized for asking to be treated with care, this is your permission. You don't have to explain your power. You don't have to hide your voice. You don't have to stay, even if you're wearing white, even if they're watching, even if you're scared, especially if you're scared. Choose yourself. Even if your voice shakes." She hit save. She didn't post it. Not yet. Some things aren't meant for the feed. Some things are meant for when someone else, somewhere, is sitting on a bathroom floor wondering if they're allowed to walk away from a story they never wrote. Celeste would share it someday. But for now, it was enough to know it existed. Like her voice. Like her peace. Like the quietest kind of courage. The kind that says, "I don't need a ceremony to be whole. I just need to be mine." In life, we're often taught to keep the peace, smile through discomfort, tolerate just jokes, and be easy to love. But there comes a moment when peace at any cost becomes a prison. Celeste's story reminds us that self-respect is not a luxury, it's a necessity. Choosing yourself doesn't make you selfish, it makes you whole. Walking away from what diminishes you isn't a failure. It's freedom. And for many, especially women of a certain age who were raised to endure and stay quiet, this truth may arrive late, but it's never too late to claim it. You don't have to explain your strength. You don't have to shrink to fit someone's comfort. Whether you're 28 or 68, there is courage in clarity, power in stillness, and deep peace in saying, "This is not for me." Celeste didn't just walk away from a wedding. She walked toward herself. And that's a journey worth honoring at any age,